So, welcome to this episode of our podcast. And today we're going to talk to Christine, who is from Scotland, but she lives in Iran. Um, I'm going to give the floor to her to introduce herself in her own words.
Okay, so thank you very much, both of you, for having me on your podcast. Yeah, I'm very excited to be able to contribute in any way to, let's say, clearing the air of some of the ridiculous propaganda that exists about Iran, because obviously I live here and alhamdulillah, I live here very safely and very happily.
That's great to know. That's great to know. So, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so yeah, there's always some confusion about where I'm from. So I'm originally Scottish, but I grew up in Germany. I studied in England, and then after that, I sort of emigrated to Australia. So my three children are in Australia, but I'm based in Iran now since I became Muslim. So very quickly, it was suggested to me had I thought about studying in Iran, and yeah, it sort of worked out that way. Alhamdulillah.
That's great. That's great. So, you have like Scottish backgrounds, but you lived in Germany and Australia, and I assume you know quite a few languages too, right?
Yeah, bilingual, just English, German. But yeah, obviously at school in Germany, we learn French, we learn Spanish, but I need
Hmm.
to do a lot more work on them again. It's really just reading comprehension and listening these days. It's shocking.
I see. What about Persian, Farsi?
Yes, obviously, I'm a Hausa student. So the first thing they do to the foreign Hausa students is push us through a Farsi language course. It's meant to take only 6 months, but I think especially for people who have let's say, a non-Urdu or non-Arabic language background, it tends to take longer. So it took me a full 9 or 10 months on the course. And so, yeah, I have some competency in Farsi, but I still need to improve it. Yeah,
Explain
definitely.
what the type of student you said? What is that program that you said you're on?
So Hausa is how do I describe Hausa? So Hausa are the Islamic seminaries in which students basically from all over the world study Islamic sciences. So they study jurisprudence, they study akhlaq, they study philosophy, kalam, so everything that is part of the Islamic curriculum. And the idea behind that is, well, we're supposed to become, I suppose, purify ourselves and gain more knowledge. So we can actually help other people a bit more, and so we can actually go out and speak to people about Islam in a useful way that people understand, where we can really help and contribute and just help the ummah.
And how many students are in your class? I guess.
Oh, well, I'm not even sure how many are in my university. So I'm in one of the women's seminaries. Classes can be also because obviously until quite recently, we had almost 2 years of virtually all online classes. So classes can be up to like 30 students, for example, for Arabic grammar. And then some of the other options, it can drop down to around about 10. So yeah, it
The
depends.
only Australian or Scottish representative in in your class, I would
Uh,
assume.
Yeah, so I actually don't know. At the moment, I don't know any other Scottish person in Iran. There might
Oh
be, but I
wow.
just don't know them. I've once met, I think, one other person from Australia, no, two people from Australia I sort of vaguely met. One was actually at my college, but the main cohort at some of the seminaries, my seminary, for example, are students from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, from Kashmir, from some of the African countries. Occasionally, we get Russian students from Philippines, Thailand, China. So it's quite exciting, really, because we've got people from everywhere.
So could you maybe describe why or how it is that you came to to be there as such a unique representative of let's say, the West in that environment? Because all the other countries you listed would be considered non-Western countries.
Yeah, yeah. Again, we sometimes we laugh about this because, for example, we have some seminaries that are supposed to cater for what we call the Western students, and in there we often also have students from, let's say, South America, from Russia, from China, from India. So sometimes it goes just by language ability. So people who speak English quite fluently, they sometimes get lumped together. But how did I get here? First through, I suppose, becoming Muslim and realizing that being a Muslim, and I was in Australia at that time, is not so easy. There wasn't so much of a really coherent community that I could, let's say, uh, sort of integrate into, because the communities are quite disparate where I was living. And then also just definitely a great urge, a desire to learn more, because of obviously I knew very little. So calling ourselves Muslim is one thing, and maybe doing the daily prayers and having a broad understanding of just the pillars of the faith, but then learning jurisprudential matters, which are actually really useful for our daily lives. So that's something else. So that really is best sort of learned in a sense on site, from the experts, rather than reading it myself in a book or hearing it through a friend in the community. So that's why I'm here. And I didn't really, so if you'd asked me, let's say 7, 8 years ago, are you going to go to Iran to study? I would have probably just looked at you and said, well, are you crazy? I didn't have any such plan or desire. And so it's just doors have opened. I didn't even have the intention to come to Iran in the beginning, because I thought, oh, it's way too difficult, because I actually have a UK passport. Because obviously all Scottish people only have a UK passport at the moment. And then one friend in the community suggested, oh, there's this course I've been on, which was like a summer course for the Islamic sciences. And I thought, okay, I'll try that. So I got accepted, but by the time my visa was ready to travel to so to Iran, the course had finished. I still traveled, and that was my first acquaintance with Iran. And I think during that visit, because I visited a couple of organizations, and one person said to me, suggested, you even considered studying in Iran? And then I returned back to Australia, and I thought, okay, yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe that is the thing I should be doing. And obviously there's a lot more planning, more interviews, lots of paperwork, and all these other things. Yeah.
So how did you first like get interested in, let's say, Islam first and then Iran?
Yeah. So first came Islam. That sort of, for me, it's a little bit difficult to pinpoint the exact. Well, in some ways, I can pinpoint almost the exact time. But I think it goes back to the fact that my parents never baptized me, so their idea was that I should choose my own faith. But I do know that since I was a young child, I used to basically I believed in one God, and I do my own prayers and talk to God. So all that was happening. And then bit by bit, so at school in Germany, religious education was still normal in the curriculum. So I participated in that, even though I wasn't baptized, so I was not part of a faith group. So obviously I just learned a little bit about Christianity. Later on, through some friends, I learned a little bit about Judaism. And it was actually, quite unusual, because it was through observing some of the practices in Judaism, because I was joining a service in a synagogue, and I was just observing. So I thought, oh, the prayers are really beautiful, but then there's some parts of the practices where I thought, this is just not right. Anyway, and then I do still remember one particular occasion where some members of that community had invited me one afternoon. They were sitting out in their garden. So this was in Perth, Australia. And they were really kind to me. And so this was actually for a Jewish festival. And as everyone was sitting there and the kids were playing together, and I was sitting under this sort of tent that they had constructed as part of the festival, it sort of dawned on me that, I didn't need that service. I don't need anything else. That my faith is really just my relationship to God. So literally, and almost, I think at that point in time, I was almost thinking, yeah, I just need my prayer mat and God. And but what had happened prior to this realization was that for a couple of years, I'd sort of dissociated or rather stopped consuming all sort of Western media because I was doing lots of online learning. So I was busy. I didn't have time to watch Western TV anymore. I wasn't watching any Western movies. And I was just sort of learning and learning, nothing to do with Islam or faith in the beginning. It started off with statistics. It progressed into refreshing my Spanish in an online course. I was also doing some Mandarin foundation courses. And then I came across a course that was about basically the creation of the different constitutions in the Muslim world. So it gave an insight into some of the history, some of the politics across the whole Muslim Ummah. So basically, from Algeria to Egypt through to Indonesia, Malaysia, and obviously, Pakistan and Palestine are on all of them in there. So there was so much I didn't know because I'd grown up in Germany, and you probably realize, you're probably very aware that on the whole, Germany is very pro-Israel. So growing up in Germany, yeah, I had a particular view of Israel and of Palestinians. And when I was taking this course and I started to do some of my own reading, I was thinking, hey, what is this? I was quite shocked at what I started to find out. And I also started to go on social media. So I was finding out about this, understanding more the reality of Palestine and what obviously Israel was and how it actually come into being. So just understanding about the injustice. And obviously at the same time, I'd sort of realized what my faith was. And at the same time, Iran was part of that curriculum, even though the lecturer was not sort of pro-Islamic Republic, but still there was an insight into some of the things that happened in recent history in Iran. So the terrible famine at the beginning of the 20th century, and then obviously there'd been a terrible famine right towards the end of the 19th century. And again, I was horrified. I found out that basically half the population died through starvation, deliberate starvation, basically, because they're under occupation or also due to disease. So this was feeding in. And so I was getting very motivated also to do a PhD that was related to Palestine and Iran. I even had an abstract written up. I went and presented it, discussed it with a lecturer at the uni in Perth. And obviously the first thing was, Palestine's too difficult. And they didn't want to know anything about Iran. So the lecturer was suggesting to me, why don't you do about an African country? And, that wasn't what I wanted to do. So the PhD got shelved, but I continued the reading. And obviously the interest in politics and the awareness of the injustices and suffering. So that continued, and then obviously I just started to learn more, read up more actually about Islam itself too. So they went hand in hand.
So would you say that politics and the issue of Palestine in particular played a role in your discovering Islam and then Iran?
Yeah, for me
becoming
they
interested.
For me they go together. So when people, so to me Islam is about obviously, first of all, it is serving Allah. But obviously, we serve Allah because Allah, as we find out when we read, Allah doesn't actually need us. He doesn't need our worship. Allah needs nothing. So it's for us to serve Allah, and we serve Allah through serving humanity, through serving any of Allah's creatures. And obviously, we are tasked with making ourselves better. And we have many models. Obviously, we have obviously the Holy Prophet, so we know. we can see the sort of behavior the akhlaq were meant to have. So my understanding is that we have the pattern of the Holy Prophet. This is what we're supposed to aspire to. We're supposed to develop some of these characteristics, which in a sense are sort of divine characteristics. And obviously, and justice, obviously, because as a Muslim, is hugely important. So yeah, they go together. We cannot. I really don't see how we could be Muslim and ignore the suffering of others. And obviously we're being taught that we must care for example, we must care for our immediate family. We must care and show and do particular actions for our neighbors, for close relatives, more distant relatives, and for the ummah, for sort of the community of Muslims at large.
It's interesting because justice is also bandied about in the West, through social justice concepts. And it's also, I would say, Christianity. Most Christians would say that their focus is also justice, although some groups are more hawkish than others. And Judaism, I think if you talk to some scholars, they would say justice is important. So it is kind of interesting how that term is thrown around a lot, but it seems to be only certain groups that understand the colonial injustice in Palestine. I mean, there are some Christian groups that are very active on that, but it's a very fringe group. But I'm very impressed with Iran as a state. Like, they've sacrificed so much of their political currency and their actual currency and their the security of their population to stand up for this state, which isn't offering them great riches in returns. It's just a simple matter of human rights. And the irony is, most, I think, young people in the West would agree that the situation in Palestine is unjust, and yet for some reason Iran is a pariah for pushing for this. And so I just wanted to make that point. But and if you had anything to elaborate on that, I would like to hear it, and maybe also how you would relate to people who don't see Iran through a religious lens. What you would say your experiences have been there, that someone who has no religious context, how would you relate what Iran has done for you outside of a religious context?
Yeah. So maybe just to pick up on the first point you were making, so the fact that there are some, obviously in the West, who maybe are aware of what's happening in Palestine, who call out the injustice, but at the end of the day, so it's quite limited, because there is something that I can see that is more prevalent in the West, because obviously there is a absence of faith in a sense. So there isn't really this compassionate understanding that the person next, the other person, so whether that other person is just our neighbor physically, let's say in Perth, Australia, or whether that other person is our, let's say, our brother or sister who is maybe, let's say, in Afghanistan or in Palestine. So through Islam, I think we understand that so long as there are injustices being perpetrated, we must care for that person as much. So we cannot, in a sense, just rest and live in comfort and peace, maybe in small Muslim pockets, whether it's in the West or elsewhere, while huge injustices and suffering is going on elsewhere. That's just not the way we should be thinking. But obviously in the West, there's very much more this idea that, well, okay, that's not in my backyard, literally. So people might be more concerned to do things for, let's say, their community, their local community, or maybe if it's in Australia, maybe just deal with some Australian issues. But people tend to say, oh, Palestine. Well, they'll say, oh, that's been going on for decades. What can one person do? And so it's a sort of defeatist kind of thinking, which I really don't like. So that's one of the things that I find difficult to deal with in the West. And I'll bring examples to them that are not examples of Muslims, but I'll try and say to them, well, and typically I always use examples such as, let's say, Nelson Mandela, so a very normal person who ended up having a huge impact in his country and affecting a huge change. And I'll say to them, well, look at this person, look at what he did. He was just a normal person. He wasn't a particularly, let's say, he wasn't, let's say, a messianic leader or anything like that. He wasn't all good. He was a normal human being. And so individuals can have a huge impact, whether it's for a nation or a huge impact just on some of the people around them, their friends, their family, or in a slightly larger setting. So that's the issue I have with some people in the West. And then obviously what I could say to people who maybe are secular, who may be interested in Iran, but they're wondering, well, so what can Iran offer to people who aren't Muslims or who aren't Christians or anything else? Well, so in my opinion, what Iran offers is actually intellectual freedom and also diversity of opinion. So you can probably imagine that if people have particular opinions, especially at this time, these times with what's going on, and I'll just say the word Ukraine. I don't talk about it at all because I have a very strong opinion. So in the West, I think it would be very difficult to open our mouths and say anything with that and having people understand or even want to engage. So sadly, I was even aware of a conversation that I had with some friends of my father's very recently. So this was an older guy. He's in his early 70s. And we're having just a very polite conversation. And he, so almost in a whispering tone, said, "Oh, by the way, I shouldn't say this, but my background is Russian." And he was almost embarrassed to say this. And obviously, and then the extreme is we know that people in the West at Western universities, they get silenced, they are dismissed from their post if they come out too strongly in their support of Palestine, or rather if they're denouncing the Zionists. And obviously the Ukraine issue will be something like that too, where it's very polarized. So that's just one thing, just this of intellectual freedom and religious freedom too. So I know that some people in the West might say, well, but how about other faiths? Can other faiths live and practice freely? And again, the story of an Iranian cleric who he'd been working in Australia for I think 20 years, and he was obviously made friends with leaders from other faith groups. So he told me that he had made friends with a Catholic priest, and he was trying to persuade the Catholic priest to visit Iran because obviously, especially in Australia, he didn't know what to think of this. He was a bit anxious about traveling to Iran because he thought, well, how will people react to me? And what if I'm wearing my robes? How will that be? And so he went for his first visit, only for a few days because he was still quite anxious and maybe terrified, but he wanted to visit his Iranian friend. And apparently it went really well. And so the Iranians were literally stopping in the street and they're really curious and really happy and excited that here was this Catholic priest from abroad. Obviously just want to chat and find out. And obviously it went quite well. And I was told that, he returned for several more visits, longer visits. So that's the other element, just the religious freedom. But then the third one, which is very important, and there are many more. Third one is, I think, let's say it's an intellectual culture. So, for example, when in Australia, I noticed that, for example, the culture of books is dying out. So many bookstores have been closed down. When I traveled back to Scotland recently, I was actually quite happy to see that bookstores are still doing really well. So still a little bit of intellectual culture, which is also book culture, obviously. But here, of course, I know that obviously books are hugely important. There are so many bookshops everywhere. And that's just a little sign to me of what a nation is interested in. And another little thing I would notice, few years back when obviously maybe this is when I was meeting up with the particular family who are really good friends in Isfahan, and I was being taken to the grandmother's house, and so all the women were sat together. So it was my friend's cousin and then the mothers and whatever, just all the extended family. And the women were huddling together and chatting. And basically, one of the first question is, "Oh, and what degrees do you have?" So, so we're women, but it's expected that we educate ourselves, and the more degrees, the better. So I'm really facing this scenario where I need to do something about that PhD, I think, too. So the pressure's on in Iran to really keep learning, which is wonderful. I really appreciate that. And that brings me on to the other point.
Sorry.
Yeah, I've been rabbiting on for so long. So yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to emphasize your point there and say that I see the complete opposite trend in the West. Like, people are dumbing down and becoming less critical thinking. I mean, all you have to do is look at the last 2 years, and you can say that there's a shocking lack of critical thought in the West. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, obviously, and then talking about this, what our education is amongst the group of women. Obviously, it's as a woman. So I felt, I would say, very comfortable, very at ease. And one aspect of that is, obviously, as a woman, I don't have to worry about safety on the streets. So in the West, because obviously the Western cultures are largely also sort of alcohol cultures to some extent. So there's always going to be a degree of, let's say, violence, or at least just of unpleasant encounters on the street, simply because people go to pubs or bars and they come out and they're drunk, and there's just a very annoying behavior. And obviously women can bear the brunt of just verbal abuse too, but it just means it's not quite as safe for anyone. And so I really appreciate that for example, so violent crime is rare here. And it's very important, really, also for families, like, because my kids were with me for 10 months here recently, and I didn't have to worry. I would say to my 10-year-old son, "Well, why don't you go down to the shop and get this?" And he didn't, because he couldn't be bothered. He was too busy on his iPad, basically. But I know, because I see the other young kids just going to the bakery or supermarket for their parents, and it's no big deal. It's quite easy. It's nice.
Yeah, that's something that I hear from especially a lot of women who travel to Iran, like as a tourist, and or like foreign women who have lived in Iran. And that's a good point that you made. I think it's like, one thing is the alcohol culture, and the other thing is that here still families are like functioning. So you don't see a lot of people like without families, or like totally separated from families. And I think so helps with how women feel safe on the streets. Like, I can walk down the street in Isfahan or in Tehran quite late at night without really worrying about anything.
Yeah, and obviously one thing that feeds into that also is very useful, especially in the warmer months, because so for example in Australia, and I noticed that, and I know some Iranians I know who've moved to Australia comment on that. So they've maybe moved to, let's say, Western Australia, to Perth, which is quiet, from Tehran, and they get there, and then they'll say to me, "It's so quiet, there's nothing to do," because they're used to Iran, where everyone, families, they go out in the evening, shops are open late, and the parks are full. Kids play really late, sometimes to after midnight, 1 a.m, whatever it is. But it just means it feels safe. So if we want to go out on our own to do something, it's not a big deal, because everyone else is out there. Families are shopping. There are groups of women going out shopping, and it's normal. So it's very easy lifestyle that way.
What do you think people in Australia are doing during that time? Are they at home watching TV?
Yeah, possibly. I've literally struggled to find like a cafe that's open after like 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in Perth. Yeah, so they'll be at home and maybe watching sport. So whereas in Iran, let's say there's the book culture, or just a culture of hanging out with the families in the evening. In Australia, there's a lot of sport is consumed. So whether it's watching it on TV or things like that, or just TV. I don't know. I have to assume some of this, because my family are a little bit, obviously, because of me, they're probably a little bit different, but they're still part of the Australian culture, I think.
I think it relates to what you said in the beginning of your transformation, that you reduced your screen time and your consumption of, because I think the programming of media is so intense in the West and nobody actually understands it. They think, oh, I'm not watching the news, I'm watching Netflix. And that is not any different. That is also programming an intense cultural narrative. And so if you're not talking to other people and liberating your time away from that constant stream of programming, it makes critical thought, it makes thinking and being curious very difficult, because the whole purpose of that stream is to keep you glued and not asking questions. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's
Yeah. And it's difficult because obviously if people, well, two things. If people are just sort of spending their evenings consuming movies or the Western news, they're being fed sort of different sorts of images that maybe aren't really promoting good moral values anyway, because so many serials and movies, I suppose commercials in the West, have sort of gratuitous violence or nudity or just sort of things like alcohol and all these other sort of moral issues that we don't really want to sort of see. So there's that. And then, but also just the time. If we want to keep learning and improving our mind, well, we can't do that if we're using our time to watch TV. So we have to just cut it. Yeah. If it's not useful, if we don't gain from the media, then what's the point?
And how you describe the evenings in Iran, which I'm familiar with vicariously through a lot of Satara's help. I think that seems like a very great, it's a wonderful alternative to hang out outside with your family and with your neighbors and talking, and like that is something that you just don't see. The only place I see that around, I'm in Atlanta. The only place I see that around here would be in communities that tend to be more Latin American, like immigrants here. They do that a lot. But actually, like people who've been here generations, like you get trained to just stay inside. And I mean, that's something, maybe on the 4th of July, you go out to a park, maybe, and you talk with some strangers, maybe, but it's very rare. So you would like, yeah, it's a different way of consuming your world, I think, or interacting with your world.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I remember, so when I used to live in Perth, I'd come in contact with people who'd moved to Australia from other parts of the world. And I remember people from Poland, which is obviously still quite a Christian, or especially Catholic country. They would come to Perth and they'd say, or to Australia, and they'd say, what's wrong? Why do people not go out in the evenings? Why is there nothing happening? And so even there, but so it's interesting. So maybe this again is related to whether there's still a strong, let's say, more of a culture of the family doing things together, which tends to be in, let's say, more the faith-based communities, as you say, maybe Latin America, maybe some of the Catholic countries, I suppose, possibly so Italy and Spain, obviously have a bit more of that going on too.
It may be faith-based, but it also may be simply the way, because I think a strong connection between America and Australia doesn't really have to do with religious prominence. I mean, in Atlanta, I think we probably have more Christian churches than you do in Australia, because it's just a tradition in the southern U.S. But I think it has to do more with like the Western culture, like the way that there's a kind of a universal attack on the culture. That's how I would perceive it across the West, where we have this every day you read about some new, like, politically correct or some other hysteria that is trying to change how people have interacted with each other for eons, and in a way in which that you can't adapt that quickly in a healthy way. So we have kind of a decay that's happening across the West. So I think that, at least that's how I would try and perceive it, between Australia and America, and probably Scotland and the UK, and the other Five Eye countries, I guess we can say it that way. They
Yeah,
seem
I think so.
unified under that giant narrative bubble
Uh-huh.
that is kind of oppressing everyone and changing them. And you're outside of that in Iran. Would you say that's a correct or similar
Yeah, yeah.
view?
Well, a lot of it is and I have to say it's the Anglo-Saxon countries in particular that obviously have sort of shaped this sort of agenda. And obviously, and then even though some people think of some of the other European countries, as progressive, it's not. There's not. I don't see a big difference there. So yeah, but yeah, that is it. Yeah, I agree with you.
Well,
Okay.
I guess I'll just have one more question, and I saw that you are a fan of cats, and
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
was going
thought
to do
you
this
could,
question too.
oh, is that
I
your
couldn't
question?
wait for the cats. No, I mean, I couldn't wait for cats to be brought up to our conversation. So,
I thought I had to break it in at some point. So like we're
yeah.
fans of cats here, and
Oh, that's good.
maybe you could tell us about your experience with cats in Iran, or just animals in general, like how how that how that's happened for you, and maybe what the
Yeah,
differences are between Iran and the West. Or,
yeah, yeah. So there are obviously differences. So my background with cats is that I grew up with cats. So my family always had cats. So they weren't. So we usually say there's cat people and there's dog people. Well, my family were always cat people. And then I was here in Iran, but back in Perth, we'd had a cat as well. So with my kids, we'd had a cat, and prior to that, we had a cat that died. But then, sadly, the other cat died too. But anyway, I was here in Iran. Corona had happened, and my family were due to come out and stay with me for a little bit. But because the borders in Australia got closed, that wasn't happening. So I was sort of here. I couldn't. And like many people in Iran, it was difficult to go anywhere. We couldn't really go in. We couldn't get out of the country so easily because, things were difficult all over. Different measures were being taken in different parts of the world. So I was here, and I think it was about 6 months after Corona had started. So uh, I was still going out because I still believe that we need to walk and we need to get some exercise. So I'd still do that, and in the beginning, especially taking all the precautions, with the obviously always a mask, but even all the gloves and all that. And my father would tell me off. He'd say you shouldn't go out. He'd talk to me in video call and tell me off about going out during Corona. But then I saw this message on one of my groups from this lady in Tehran, and she had said that she had taken in this little kitten. It was probably just about 4 weeks. It had terrible eye infection, and she had just taken it in because it was outside their apartment block the whole time on its own, just crying and crying. So she took it in out of pity, and she was keeping it in a box in her bathroom, but she was just asking if someone else could actually take this kitten on because she couldn't keep it at that stage. So I said, obviously, it's obvious that I like cats, and I was just thinking, I hadn't even thought at all about having cats in Iran. That wasn't really on my mind, but I saw this kitten. I thought, okay, so I asked my landlord permission. He gave permission, which was very kind of him. And then a friend, again, because it was Corona time and I really didn't fancy traveling up to Tehran myself, but a friend went up, collected the cat in a box, brought the cat back. And then I had this 4-week-old kitten. And obviously, so it was really nice. When I'd been out, I'd come back and the cat would run to the door and greet me. So it was really beautiful because at this stage, I was still separated from my kids, waiting for them, but I had to at the same time do my studies, do my work, and then I had this strange little cat creature to take care of. Uh, and obviously I had the cat. The cat was about 6 months when my family finally rocked up from Australia. And during the summer months, we would go out, and they loved the cat, obviously, because they're definitely cat people as well. But we were going out, and we would sort of put water out for the cats around the city. And then sometimes I'd have dried biscuits because I had them for my own cat. And if I saw a cat that looked like it was really emaciated, I'd maybe put down a little sort of container with some biscuits. And then one evening I saw this cat, and she was really emaciated. It looked to me like she wasn't going to survive. Even her tail was really skinny. But I had some biscuits and some water, so I gave her that. And I didn't feel good about leaving her there, but there was nothing. I think we were due to sort of go away the next day for a few days. So anyway, we got back and I went back to that place and she was there. And so after that, I started going to that same place every evening to feed her. And I'd sort of be looking around, wondering, where is she? And she'd be running after me from behind me. So but then one evening, my son said, "Oh, look, there's this little kitten." Because she'd walked up the footpath and there was a little kitten coming out from under a fence. And I thought, oh, so it's not just her, she's got this tiny kitten. But anyway, so we thought, okay, so if we want to look after the mum, we must also rescue her kitten. So we were ready to do that one evening with my kids. And then a guy in the shop right next to where I'd always see her said, "Oh, there's a second kitten." And then I thought, okay, so it turned into a big rescue operation. So one evening, the one kitten, and the following evening, the mum and the second kitten, and they all got taken to the vet and got their vaccinations and all that. And the kittens were totally healthy, which was amazing. They were about 2 months, but the mum was really emaciated and she had some other issues internally. So she sadly didn't uh, survive, but the kittens thrived.
Oh,
And then, because I had these 3 cats, then the same friend who brought my first cat had found another cat in Tehran that was crying, that was lodged inside a castle in quite a dangerous place, really. Had looked after the kitten a bit, but then had to sort of bring it back to the city and sort of gave it to me, saying, "Oh, maybe I can help to find a family for it." But yeah, I don't know. We didn't really get round to looking for a family because my kids loved the cats. Then my kids left, so I've still got the 4 cats. But obviously, as a Muslim now, having cats, obviously it poses certain other issues. So I've already sort of had to sort of find out, okay, what are the best ways of removing cat hair efficiently? So things like that, because obviously if we follow our marja, that means we have to make sure that where we pray and whatever we wear is free of cat hair. And obviously the different marja have slightly different rules, so people need to check that for themselves. I'm not going to dish out the different rulings of the marja, even though I know them, but people should take the responsibility themselves. So yeah, it's so alhamdulillah, cats are not najis like human beings. It's just certain things that are najis, similar things as with us. But yeah, and so the sticky tape is a wonderful thing to use for getting rid of cat hair. And then they also have these very good rollers for just sort of taking things off clothes too. But yeah, so that's the main challenge. Yeah.
That's a very
Yeah,
interesting about the mother cat who basically sacrificed herself to raise 2 healthy babies.
Yeah.
That's very
She was a beautiful cat, amazing mother cat. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
How would you say your experience as a pet owner in the West and then in Iran? How would you say what are the difference in perceptions of the human animal kind of relationship in Iran versus the West?
Yeah, so it's definitely. I mean, I haven't grown up in Iran, so I can only speak from the perspective of someone who's been more aware of this in the last couple of years. So it is different. So owning animals, and let's just restrict it to cats, because dogs actually are, they're that's a whole different issue. Because I always have to say that, yeah, for example, for Muslim people, they want to keep dogs, they have to be aware that dogs are najis, so it just makes it hugely complicated if they decide to keep dogs in the house. But that's not none of my business. That's separate. So I'm just going to talk, let's say, about I suppose some people birds and guinea pigs and rabbits and then cats. So it's not as normal. For example, I live in an apartment. I don't know what it would be like if I had, let's say, a small house where I have an enclosed backyard. That could be ideal, maybe. But like in the West, so people might let their cats go out in the back garden, and maybe they go into the neighbor's garden, and because they think, oh, they've got some good food there today, let's take some of their cat food, and so it's quite easy. So here, because owning cats is not the norm at the moment, I wouldn't think of doing that, because I don't know, people maybe don't appreciate that, having, cats roam into their gardens. Because not everyone likes cats. In the West, animal ownership, cat ownership is totally different. But this is, but that's fine. That's fine.
But my cat, like I keep a cat at home, and she can go to the neighbors' houses, and she's actually treated very well, although they don't have cats. So, and I also grew up like in my family, both my grandmothers had cats when I was a kid, and when they were kids, and they come from like a religious background. So it also depends on the families. Like my family, we're familiar with cats. And I think like in the past, I know many families in Iran with religious backgrounds who used to have cats, but they stopped keeping them because they were more concerned, I don't know, like in more recent years, people were more concerned with hygiene, and they thought that cats are not as clean, or like, I mean, animals in general. So they it looks to me like people stopped keeping them, and especially because many people stopped living in like houses with yards and more like space for the cats to keep them. But yeah, it's not very common for families to have cats, but I also know families who have cats.
Well, obviously, I see what I would probably perceive as religious families when I go to the vets. I see religious families, mums and the kids coming in with the different pets, especially cats are very popular. But yeah, some of it definitely has to do with this prevalence of apartment living. And I have to add, even in the West, so for pet owners, living in apartments, so just renting, isn't easy. So, for example, when my family were here, we'd actually rented out the house, and we rented out actually to people who had pets, but it's difficult. So when you have pets in the West too, you might not be able to rent all houses or apartments. So that's actually normal. So it could be due to that people used to have houses with backyards, which is much easier when we've got the cats. Apartments aren't so easy with cats. We really need to be much more careful. And it's not so nice for cats, probably, because they really like to be outside. But,
What about the cultural like perception of animals? Because I find that I haven't spent much time in Iran, but I've spent quite a bit of time in the Levant and the North Africa, and I find, except for Egypt, I would say there is, well, the other Muslim countries I've been in the region are there's a real kind of fear of animals that I do not see I mean, if you see a dog that's angry and barking like in an angry way, a lot of people, if it was a big dog, would be afraid of it naturally. But like a chihuahua barking angrily at you would simply elucidate laughter in most people in America. I mean, even if it was biting on your shoe, it'd be funny, but it can really terrify people in other countries, which I find, I mean, it's not good, but I find it funny. But I found that situation funny when a very small dog makes a very big man like yelp in fear. But I don't understand that, and so I've always been curious why that is, because it's so different. It's one of those things where it's a stark difference in cultural things where and I don't know if you have, in your experience, could you shed any light onto why you think there is that difference? Because I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, I have come across that. So I've come across this, for example, if I've mentioned to a couple of people, maybe one of my friends wants to come and visit me in my apartment. I say, look, I've got cats at home. Is that okay with you? And maybe, and obviously I've met a couple of my Iranian friends actually scared of cats, so I would then meet them, say, in a cafe. I've also met, for example, maybe a fellow student from Pakistan who's also admitted that she's terrified of cats. So it's difficult for me to explain that. It's really about what we grow up with. So if we grow up with seeing animals around us and just sort of seeing it's normal and we can observe their behavior, obviously we're not going to be scared. But then I have to add that obviously you're probably aware that even in the West, there are people who are, for example, scared of mice.
Yeah.
We could ask, well, why are adults scared of this tiny little creature? I've never really been able to quite figure that one out myself. So maybe it's similar with other animals.
Well, I'm a beekeeper, and I'm if I'm not wearing my veil, I'm still scared of bees. Like if they run at me, if they start buzzing at me, I'll run. Like I'm not standing around to get stung. So there's some kind of logical connection if something's gonna hurt you. But yeah.
Yeah, but like cockroaches don't hurt you, but like they're really they creep me out.
Yeah.
And
Bees make sense because they can sting. Yeah, if
Exactly.
you've got a whole swarm of bees. But okay, one cockroach, obviously most of us tend not to like them, or just phrase it like that. We might try and avoid them. But mice aren't, I don't know. Yeah. I mean they're not really going to do anything to us, I don't think so. Yeah, it's just weird things as human beings. It's like some of us are sort of, I don't know, just sort of made like that to have our little phobias of different things too.
Yeah, it's called.
Like you mentioned, it's because not many people keep animals in their houses. Like, I don't know many people here who do keep animals in their houses, and so they have like they're not very familiar with how the animal acts, and they expect them to like just suddenly run up to them or they get scared. I mean, a part of it is that it's not as common probably to have animals, have pets here.
Yeah.
Do you think that makes it more difficult in terms of people appreciating like appreciating the I don't know, the idea of like respecting an animal's feelings in terms of like not feelings in terms of human feelings, but in terms of pain and suffering? Do you think that affects that? Because it's sometimes even difficult in the West to sort of like get people to like try and be nice to animals. And I assume if you're rescuing street cats, that's something that probably is a struggle for you to try and like come to peace with, or try and figure out how to maybe address and educate people on, or something like that, in a way that's not like you're not trying to impose your culture, but you're trying to come to like a reasonable arrangement.
Yeah. Oh, look, as a Muslim, actually, the pet ownership thing, when I see other creatures, the way I view them has probably changed, because obviously I've learned more recently that obviously all animals, so all creatures other than human beings, they basically go straight to paradise anyway. It's us human beings who have this big struggle to see if we're going to be fit for that or not, depending on whether we do enough good things, say enough good things. So, but all these creatures go straight to paradise. And for me, this is a beautiful thought. So sometimes, so I'll look at my cats and think, wow, I'm literally surrounded by 4 creatures from paradise. So that in itself is a huge blessing. And through reading some of the Islamic texts, obviously on my course, it does spell out, obviously, as I said before. So we can serve God, we can serve Allah through serving humanity, through serving as creatures, through serving the environment. So this is obviously a Muslim, and there's some of the senior clerics do say this. And I remember I came across a beautiful little story on the English website of Ayatollah Bahjat. They said that they had some chickens in the garden, and one day Ayatollah Bahjat came home, and he realized that it was cold outside, and the chickens were still outside. So he wasn't very happy. So he told his family to bring them in, bring the box inside. So and we're advised also by some of the senior clerics on some of the religious channels that we shouldn't walk past suffering. So, for example, if there's something little we can do, let's say if we happen to have something in our bag and some water, and we see that it's really hot, and there's a cat that probably doesn't have access to water during these hot days, and the least we can do is to try and reduce some of the suffering by giving it water. So it's being merciful. And merciful is obviously we need to be merciful to human beings, but we also can't, we have to have the same mercy towards all creatures because everything's created by Allah. So if we say to ourselves, oh, well, these cats, if we think, oh, these cats are nothing, I don't need to treat them well, I can abuse them, well, we're actually abusing something that Allah has created. And, I don't know, maybe that's not a good thing. And same the way Narakba talks about this, we're meant to care for the environment. That means we look after everything around us. So we have to actually be responsible in the larger sphere. So maybe it's unusual, but I've found learning more about Islam to actually help me actually a bit more also as a Muslim to see, okay, I've actually got responsibilities towards these creatures. Also, given that I have, as I've taken them on, so if I decide to, let's say, get rid of them, literally throw them out of my house, that's actually a very bad thing because I've taken them on, I've given them shelter. And if I do that to them, I'm actually causing them great suffering. So, these are the duties I have as a Muslim.
I remember there was a park near my house where a lot of cats, and I used to go walking, and yeah, I saw ladies who were really scared of cats, but still they wanted to feed them. Like they would keep away from the cats, but like they want to feed the cats or even the birds there. So yeah, I mean that's like really recommended. I'm not saying that everyone observes that, but that's really recommended in our culture and in Islam. There are many hadith which says like you have to be merciful to animals and plants, and if you like them, it's like sinful. So I think, yeah, I personally know people who are probably very scared of animals, like different kinds of animals, including cats, but they still want to feed them and like be nice to them.
And actually, that's actually a really beautiful example because for people like the three of us, feeding a cat in a park or anywhere, it's easy. We don't have to overcome some huge hurdle. We have no fear. But obviously, there's someone who has a big fear of these animals, but still shows mercy and does that. Obviously, that means they're going to get huge thawab for that. That's an amazing deed. So it's really beautiful that some people do that, actually. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. So apart from cats, another questions that I want to ask you is like how long have you been in Iran?
So I've been almost full time since, I would say, September 2019. Obviously, I have to add, it's sort of partly Corona enforced because I couldn't leave. And then my family were here, and they again then couldn't leave. They sort of got stuck with me for quite a while. So I've had 2 months out of Iran in that period. And then before that, I'd already come for a few months, and then I went back for like a month to Australia, was here for a few months, went back for 3 months. But yeah, so for almost 3 years, more or less full time. Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to ask you how, or do you see the effect or the impact of sanctions on Iran, or has it affected you or anyone in any ways?
Yes, obviously sanctions. So one thing I become aware of, for example, through friends, is that obviously certain medications maybe aren't available. For example, people with diabetes, even though there's some good medication, good products available of good quality. But obviously it's limited because there's certain things that just can't be accessed. And obviously I'm aware, also because obviously it gets commented on a lot on social media. So obviously there's, I think it's called the butterfly disease. There's a horrible illness
EB or
that is very causes great suffering, especially to the kids, and they can't. Again, there's no access to these specific bandages. I think the specific dressings that would actually help them. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is I can't remember how long, whether this is going back a year and a half now. One of the Iranian universities was sanctioned by the US Treasury. So you remember that was the Al Mustafa International University was sanctioned. And I was told that as a result of that, it became difficult for American students. So I think maybe some left. And others probably had to actually go and study at a different university because the threats were that, not only would their bank accounts be frozen, family assets would be frozen. I don't know. This is what I was told anyway.
Right. I was going to ask you, like, how do you think sanctions on like an Iranian university would affect its foreign students, like American students? So you're saying that if they at least they fear that their accounts would be frozen, and okay, yeah, that's
obviously I
incredible.
don't have because I don't really have much contact with one American student. So she would tell me, oh, this is what's happening. She would say, oh yeah, quite a few people have left, but I don't know. I'm assuming that's correct, that it had some impact, because obviously when people think about having no access to their own bank account, and then maybe things becoming difficult for family members. These are serious issues.
That's true.
But obviously it doesn't put everyone off.
Well, all you have to do is look at Canada. Canada, the protest in Ottawa. I mean, if you were helping to feed the truckers protest, Canadian government would freeze your personal bank account and you couldn't pay your rent. So we're seeing that more and more in the West, this kind of authoritarian control of people's own money that supplies. So I could see, that as a very, very legitimate threat in America, that your private bank account would be shut down because it's politically valuable to try and pressure, especially students who are trying to learn from exposure to Iran. Because if they come there and they see people are very nice and generous and it's very safe, and the whatever boogeyman has been generated about the Iranian experience is it's not true. You get a lot of people who are angry that they were lied to, and then you get a lot of people who are willing to be activists and try and change other people's minds. So I can
and I suppose to some extent the hurdles they'll always present themselves, but somehow for many people, so for example for the one American student I do know, other doors open, and there are ways of getting around some of these things. So Allah always opens doors and supports people on their path. So no matter what the US does, at the end of the day, they can't really do anything. They'll put a little bit of fear and anxiety into some people, but others, if they just sort of think it through, and maybe just make their plans properly, I'm sure Allah will support them so they can continue the path and come to Iran and study, do what it is they really want to do.
You point people towards like a particular website or organization if they wanted to pursue coming to Iran to study? Like what university what website would you recommend people search for? Because I assume that's not easy to.
Well, I suppose to say one of the big universities in Iran one of the very well-known universities. Everyone's heard of Tehran, hopefully. Look, no one told me, for example, oh, you must find out about studying in Iran on this website. It was also done through, oh, have you thought about this? And then obviously I had one interview at house that was organized for me while I was on a Ziara trip in Iran. And then, the other things you just sort of do partly online, or you do the interviews when you come back to Iran. But yeah, I know that Tehran University is a very good website because, as I mentioned, I'm always thinking about this PhD. So, I've been looking at maybe one of the faculties in Tehran University too. And I
Yeah,
see,
maybe.
there's quite a lot of information. It's good.
And for those who want to start learning about Iran or maybe like Islam, especially Shia Islam, which is, I think, like less known to people, do you recommend any book or website where they can like read more and find out more about Iran and Islam?
Well, there's one, there's a, I'm just thinking, because I read the whole variety of websites. One website that I used to find quite useful, and I think they're uploaded in that one. So, but that's islampfr.com. So that's got lots of really Muslim, especially Shia Muslim resources. So their website is good because they've got videos and they've got articles, different sorts of things, different sort of du'as, different prayers. So it's nice. But for people, I think quite social media savvy, who are using Instagram and let's say Twitter, I think one of the best bets, because this is what helped me immensely, is to just try and liaise, for example, with people who seem to be a little bit knowledgeable and share some good resources on the social media. So I found that I've had some beautiful things shared with me by some brothers and one of my sisters in Iran. One of all three of them are actually sort of family friends now. So yeah, so my family. So we established very, very close contacts, and they helped me massively. Really good thing, depending, can also be to, for example, just get some contact with the local Iranian community. So when I become Muslim, my the lovely Christian primary school teacher of my son, because obviously she saw me coming to school with a hijab, and she was, oh, she's become Muslim. And then she thought to herself, oh, I know this Iranian lady in this other class. She's also got a kid here because she's Muslim. So she put us in touch. And then this lovely lady from Tehran taught me to pray. And some good tips on how to behave when I come to Iran, what not to do, and all these things. And so that's hugely beneficial if there's someone there in the local community.
Right. So can people follow you on Twitter to see, like, I'm sure you also post about Iran and your experience in Iran, and so you are probably a good source to refer to.
Yeah, I post on Twitter, I post on Instagram, and so people who I actually very rarely get people who are just the trolls who want to say something nasty about Iran. Alhamdulillah, I've got some just generally some sort of really nice people following me and commenting. But I'm more than happy to try and give some good advice. Some good people. And there's some really good institutes. There are institutes in Iran that deal, for example, specifically with rebats. But because they obviously have very good local knowledge, they would help people who aren't rebats, I'm sure. There's no issue.
Great. Chris, do you have any questions?
What's your Twitter account name? What's your handle?
The Twitter handle is just Zeinab Kirsteen, at Zeinab Kirsteen. Kirsteen with the
we will make sure to put the link on
Instagram.
Okay.
Great. Chris, do you have any questions to ask?
I mean, maybe you could leave us with your how what you would like Australians or Scottish or people in the West to know about Iran, like that you when you meet them or after spending time there, it became very, very like clear that they don't understand it and they can't understand it without going there. Like what would you say is your message that you've learned by living in Iran that you would like to like relate to people?
Okay, so what can I say? So I have to give a message that is really from like the heart, really how the way I.
Internet is
So
we
do
didn't hear
think
you.
so.
Can you repeat?
the
Yeah.
internet is not our friend
Yeah,
right
Yeah.
no, it drops out sometimes. Yeah, so I'd have to say, so when I returned to Iran, like when I came back to Iran from Scotland, so it just felt like it's so easy and friendly. So Iran for me is very dynamic. So for me to leave Iran I'd be sad because it's exciting. Things keep changing. Stuff just keeps being built. Like Sister Setka probably knows, I used to travel to Isfahan quite a bit, and I love traveling to Isfahan. And I would be amazed. I've been gone from Isfahan for a few months, and I go back and I think, whoa, it's changed again. Stuff just keeps getting better. So it's an incredibly exciting country with a very, what can I say, very curious group of people, very outward looking. And what I like is there's just an openness to the world, an openness towards debate and thought, which is quite unique. And that's why, inshallah, if I have the opportunity, I hope I can really stay here for a long time to just keep learning.
We would be very happy to see you more, and because we haven't met in person yet, and I really look forward to that. Like I like to see you and your cats too, and maybe you can start doing your PhD in the University of Tehran, because you know that they have an Iranian studies program where they accept foreign students, and I know a lot of people from different countries who are studying there. So it would be great to have you here for a longer time.
Inshallah. Yeah, let's see how Allah plans it. Let's see. Yeah.
So,
right,
Chris, do you have any questions?
No, that was great. We've learned a lot. I think it was a really interesting discussion. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we can catch up in the future and hear how many more cats you've adopted.
Yeah. Well, inshallah,
yeah,
the
exactly.
three of us will even catch up in Isfahan. I'd love to travel down there.
Yeah.
We
Oh
can
my God, that
continue
would
our
be
discussion,
great.
all of us. Yeah.
Well, as an American
Yeah.
citizen, it's a challenge, but hopefully I can get there sometime.
Yeah, hopefully. Hopefully. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts with us. I think it's I always, as an Iranian living here, I think it's very important to show the world the human side of things that happen in Iran. I think you helped a lot with that. Just like how daily life is here, especially for a woman who comes from the West. And yeah, we learned a lot, and I really appreciate your time and sharing your ideas and your experiences with us.
Alhamdulillah. It was really good talking to the two of you. And obviously, I was really happy to finally be able to talk to you, Sister Seto, even though we're face to face in Riyadh, outside
yeah,
the
inshallah.
space.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we follow like our cat pages on Instagram follow each other, so that's how we got closer. Why cats are an important part of an important part of this conversation.
There, you should say your cat. What's your cat Instagram?
Oh, yeah. Well, my cat's name is Kifi. So Kifi Cat is the page. KEEFI and cats.
Perfect. So now all the viewers can follow both follow the cat community in Iran.
Exactly.
Great.
So it's not only about humans in Iran; it's also about cats in Iran.
Why not?
You're shedding light on it. Great conversation. Thank you. Thanks to both of you,
Okay.
Chris. Thank you for showing up.
Thank
What's the
you.
time there
Thank
right
you.
now?
Oh, it's like 11:35, so it should be almost 9 o'clock.
It's 6. Yeah, here at
All right.
12.
Well, have a good evening, and thanks for the good conversation.